Welcome everybody. I think we should get started. My name's Jenny Wharf and I'm the Vice President of the Sustainable Population Australia Victoria Tasmania branch. So on behalf of Sustainable Population Australia and Victoria First, it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to this important event. And I'd also like to welcome our panel members, the Honourable Kelvin Thomson, ALP Federal MP for the seat of Wills, Ms Sheila Newman, evolutionary sociologist and author, Mr Clifford Hayes, former Mayor and Councillor of Bayside City Council, and Mr William Burke, President of the Sustainable Population Party. And Ms Jill Quirk, who's the President of SPA Victoria Tasmania, will MC the panel discussion once that gets underway. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and elders from other communities who may be here today. We have a few apologies. Councillor Coral Ross, the Mayor of Boroondara, Ms Mary Dross, the convener of Plan Backlash, and Mr Mark Wakeham, CEO of Environment Victoria. Are there any other apologies people would like to advise us of? No?
Mr Reynolds, Robert Reynolds, a SPA member.
Okay. No others? All right, well I'd like now to hand over to Jill Quirk for the panel discussion and the questions that are going to follow. Thank you.
Good afternoon everyone. Must Melbourne keep growing? Our speakers will speak on this subject and we'll have a better idea at the end of this. The first speaker is the Honourable Kelvin Thomson, ALP member for the seat of Wills, who is well known as a defender of the environment and an advocate for a sustainable population in Australia. He is the author of a 14-point plan released in 2009 to stabilise Australia's population. In 2013, Kelvin founded a new not-for-profit organisation called Victoria First, with the aim to safeguard and enhance Victoria's way of life by fighting against rapid population growth and overdevelopment, and seeking to protect Victoria's unique animals and plants. Kelvin is able in his position to frequently bring the issues of population and environment to national attention via the Parliament and in the media. Welcome, Kelvin.
Thank you very much, Jill. Can I thank everyone for coming along this afternoon, and I hope that people who are coming along for the first time find this an informative and rewarding experience. I should add to the apologies, because from the Victoria First side, Alicia Lilly, Susie Eskelton, Marion Manifold, Jeanette and Barry Hook have conveyed their apologies. And I also want to thank Jill in particular for her role in organising this afternoon. These things don't happen as a result of accident, they happen as a result of a lot of hard work, and I particularly want to express my appreciation to Jill for the work that she has done. I also want to thank the camera persons, James Cinnamon, Rob Simpson and Nosrat Hosseini. It's always a good idea to be nice to the camera persons, and I alert you to the fact that we are being recorded in this way, so you are on notice. This morning the Herald Sun reported that Melbourne has experienced its fastest property boom since the turn of the century. The median house price rose by over $100,000 in the past 9 months, jumping over 6% each quarter from June last year to the end of March this year. These figures came from the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, which is happy about them. But elsewhere in the Herald Sun, Tom Elliott, who has a radio program on 3AW, had a less rosy assessment of the situation. In an article titled "Home Horror is a People Problem," he pointed out that first home buyers face a housing market that is one of the most expensive on earth. According to the International Monetary Fund, Australian residential real estate prices as a multiple of average incomes are exceeded only by those of Canada and Belgium. And not only was Tom Elliott onto the fact that rising house prices is not a good thing for the young people who get locked out of their chances of owning their own home, he was also onto the reason why. What is the real reason houses are now so expensive, he asked, and gave the following answer: look around, it's people. More specifically, the huge increase in population that Australia, and particularly Melbourne, has experienced over the past 20 years. His conclusion was that until we work out a way to conjure up more land close to the city, reducing population growth is the only surefire method of denting property prices. He's absolutely right, and he's certainly right about the recent increase in Melbourne's population. In recent years, Melbourne's population has taken off. We've been growing at an unprecedented rate, 200 a day, 1,500 a week, 75,000 a year, more or less, year in, year out. Each new population projection for Melbourne is bigger and more outrageous than the one before it. The latest says that we'll get to 7.7 million by 2051. The question that we don't spend near enough time thinking about is this growth giving us a better city? Now, I'm not a zealot or an ideologue. I'm fundamentally a very middle-of-the-road, practical sort of person. So when I try to work out whether something is a good idea, I look around for examples to compare it with, real-life examples. So if I can't see how something works in practice, I don't set too much store by it. So in the case of thinking about an issue like the size of Melbourne, there seem to me to be two relevant kinds of examples, two kinds of comparisons that we can make. One is with other cities, both bigger ones and smaller ones. And one of the advantages of my life is that I've had the chance to see a lot of cities, both bigger and smaller. And I'm absolutely convinced that in terms of living standards and quality of life, the smaller cities have it all over the bigger ones. We do not want to become like Manila or Mumbai or New York or London. And let me return to Tom Elliott's last line this morning: until we work out a way to conjure up more land close to the city. Now, of course, some planners and policymakers, to say nothing of property developers, think that they have achieved just that with their dual occupancies and multi-unit developments, and in particular with their high-rise. Let's build upwards, they say. The City of Melbourne reported breathlessly that in 2013 it had welcomed 11,000 new residents, making Melbourne City Council the fastest growing municipality in Australia. John Mazanauskas wrote in the Herald Sun in May that over the past few years in the CBD, 90 high-rise towers have been approved. The advocates of high-rise and multi-unit developments say they are necessary to maintain housing affordability. But if this is their purpose, they are failing miserably. Housing has never been less affordable, as I pointed out earlier. Another thing they say about high-rise is that we shouldn't stress too much about quantity, it's quality that matters. Reducing our environmental footprint and living sustainably is all about good design and efficiency and so on. To respond to that, let me turn from this morning's Herald Sun to this morning's Saturday Age. Aisha Dow reports that windowless bedrooms exist in almost a quarter of new residential developments in the CBD. A Melbourne City Council study estimates that more than half of the city's tallest apartment buildings, over 15 stories, are of poor quality, with common design flaws and a lack of natural light. All of the high-rise apartment designs were considered either poor or average quality. Common failings included kitchens in hallways, poor storage, lack of ventilation and excessive energy use. The latter point is very significant because there is a myth around that high-rise is environmentally superior. The Age says some Melbourne architects are so unhappy with the result of buildings they've designed that they've refused to have their name associated with them. The article quotes the Melbourne architect John Clements, representing the Australian Institute of Architects, saying, "The general feeling among architects is that it's ridiculous to be forcing architects to produce buildings that don't have appropriate quality and amenity standards." He's calling for minimum apartment design standards to be legislated. Some people would call minimum quality standards red tape. but I say that the absence of them is a recipe for 21st century slums. Now, I lived in New York as an Australian parliamentary representative to the United Nations for 3 months a couple of years ago. Fascinating, certainly, but not as good a city to live in as Melbourne, not even close. Even the relentlessly pro-growth and pro-business The Economist ranked Melbourne at the time as the most livable city in the world. New York was 56th. No doubt this has much to do with New York's well-documented problems with crime, drugs, unemployment, beggars in the streets and unaffordable housing. And all this is on a good day. Its intricately designed public and private transport networks have no margin for error and are incredibly vulnerable to adverse effects like events like car accidents, train derailments or storms. When these things happen, the whole system seizes up and hundreds of thousands of commuters are left stranded, seething with impotent rage. Manhattan's intersections carry a myriad of signs warning of $350 fines for motorists who honk their horns. But they honk anyway. They honk constantly. They honk because they are angry, sitting there gridlocked in traffic. Now, is this really what we want for our city? Is it seriously worth sacrificing the vision of Melbourne's founding fathers of a city of parks, or of the former Victorian Premier Dick Hamer of a city of green wedges for this? And it is an urban myth that people living in high-rise buildings use less energy and have a lower environmental footprint than people in detached houses. In Manhattan, people run their air conditioners all day and all night to keep their airless apartments cool. There are no rainwater tanks, no solar PV panels, no people growing their own vegetables. Manhattan is not the self-sufficient, sustainable world of the future. It is a product of a time when we thought that the sky was the limit. But the planet does have limits. Food, water, energy, carbon. And the second kind of comparison that I like to make is with the past. I remember what Melbourne was like when I was young. I remember what it was like 10 years ago. It is not getting better. I've talked already about housing affordability. It is way harder for my children and their generation to afford a house than it was for my generation or that of my parents. And then there's the traffic congestion. We had a great discussion about that at the February Victoria First meeting with Dr. Ernest Healy. And then there's the planning. We've talked about that in Ringwood in April with Professor Michael Buxton. Developers use double-speak terms like housing choice and sustainable and exemplary design and efficient planning, but these are all code for removing residents' rights to meaningfully object to developments in their neighbourhoods. I stand for the right of all residents to have a say in the character of their street, their neighbourhood, their community, the community in which they live. You know, they say that Melbourne and Australia used to be greyer and duller before we went all out on population growth. Now, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Jim Keys has just passed away. We had the Masters Apprentices, Daddy Cool, Skyhooks, Sherbet, Zoot, Chain. Seriously, life was not duller or less interesting back then. We had more freedom and more choices. Is life better now for students, with youth unemployment at much higher levels than when I was young, and students being fitted up with deregulated course fees and a student debt that goes up at the long-term bond rate and gets bigger rather than smaller over time? I don't think so. Is life better now for older people, with electricity, gas, water and council rates increasing above the rate of CPI, with increasing costs to visit the doctor and cuts foreshadowed to the rate of pension indexation? I don't think so. And is the environment in better shape than it used to be? Well, we all know the answer to that one. Our list of endangered species grows ever longer, and climate change threatens more droughts, bushfires and extreme weather events. In recent decades, Melbourne has grown both upwards and outwards. Now, what have been the consequences? I've given a window into the consequences of growing upwards in talking about Manhattan, including beggars in the streets, and indeed, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Robert Doyle, talks at some length about the problem of begging in the city in his Mayor's message in their latest publication, not something that a Lord Mayor in the 1960s or 70s would have needed to talk about. And there are plenty of consequences from growing outwards too. We've expanded over fertile soils very suitable for vegetable growing. We've expanded into bushfire-prone areas. And when the fires come, and they always do, everyone wants someone else to pay for the damage. Homeowners, insurance companies, councils, taxpayers, no one thinks that they should have to wear the loss. And just last Sunday, the Sunday Age reported that thousands of homes in new estates from Grovedale on the outskirts of Geelong to Doreen in Melbourne's north, including homes in the municipalities of Hume, Melton and Wyndham, have been built on highly reactive volcanic clay soils on waffle slab foundations. Soil movements under a home's foundations are causing walls to crack, doors and windows to jam and floors to tilt. Homeowners now face ruinous home renovation and legal bills. They will not think that housing has become more affordable for them as a result of greedy and short-sighted behaviour by property developers and planning authorities. And this is also an issue about quality of life and the mental health of communities. Health experts have pointed out clear health benefits from exposure to nature. Children build up their immune system by playing with soil and being out in the real world rather than indoors. What do you call a kid in the backyard? A free-range kid. Joggers and walkers and cyclists have been found to derive mental health benefits from doing their exercise outdoors rather than in a gym. Patients in a hospital recover more quickly if they have a view out their window of nature rather than a wall as they convalesce. And retaining green spaces and trees and vegetation helps keep our city cool and reduces the urban heat island effect. Most of you will notice on the weather reports that Melbourne is warmer than surrounding areas, and this is because of the extent of heat-absorbing concrete, brick and bitumen that we have in the city. This might feel like a good thing in June, but it isn't when we have the heat waves in January, February or March. They kill people. We should be doing what we can to stop Melbourne from overheating. We spend endless amounts of time and energy on our grey infrastructure, the freeways, bridges, drainage and so on. We need to put more effort into protecting and advancing our green infrastructure of parks and trees and vegetation, and our blue infrastructure of creeks and beaches and lakes and waterways. We shouldn't see this as an environmental issue, as if it's some optional extra that we can afford to take care of some years but not others. It is a health issue, and our health is a core issue by any yardstick. The OECD says that health is, globally, the highest ranked issue of public concern. The things that we used to be able to afford, free education, free healthcare, a home of your own, a say in what happens in your street, now we're told we can't afford them anymore. Well, if we can't, we're not better off, we're worse off. So, in conclusion, we need to show the same foresight that the founders of this city showed when it was initially designed. They left us with a city of open space, extensive tram and train networks, and livable suburbs supported by extensive local infrastructure in the form of schools, hospitals and social services. We should likewise leave a legacy for future generations that we and they can be proud of. Thank you.